So we have a lot of issues over the years that face many of us and different entities concerning the animals. And every now and then we have a victory that we like to share with everyone. This year, Christina Hansen, New York City carriage driver, is going to be coming and talking about winning the public and killing the bill. Successful strategies in the New York City Carriage Campaign, and as she says, straight from the horse's mouth. Yeah. Welcome, Christina.
Let's see here. Let me get, is this mic on or not? Or do I have to do that with this one? Is the wireless one on, or do I just have to talk out of this one? Okay, so you can hear me. I can't hear the speakers over here, so as long as you can hear it. So we're letting this thing load up here. I was here a couple of years ago, so 2 years ago, in November of 2014, talking a lot about media relations, transparency, and where we were at that point in our fight against the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio. So, at that time, the bill had not been introduced. I got back from Florida, and about 3 weeks later, the mayor did introduce a bill, and there was a lot of political stuff going on. And then there's even more political stuff, and then they tried to move us into the park. So I have a lot of stuff to cover here, and I'm probably going to leave people out or events out. It was a complicated and whatever journey, so I apologize if anybody's like, wait, you didn't mention such and such, because we've had so many people, including a lot of people in this room, who have been extremely helpful to us and across all kinds of industries. So I'm apologizing in advance if I forget the AKC or NIA or anyone. I'm remembering you right now, but you know, so now how do I start this? Okay. Okay, I have an older version of upper left-hand side. I am terrible at this now. How do you start? How do you start?
Go right there.
Slideshow. Oh, it says slideshow.
And then go back to, once you're on slideshow, you're not there yet, click it.
Click it, click it. Oh, I have to click.
Now you can go from the beginning.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. So, okay. So, winning the public and killing the bill, because we killed the carriage bill in New York City. Straight from the horse's mouth. I took this picture of a protester about a year ago about why does such a tiny industry have so much power, because we were supposed to have been gone. And they repeated this in our hearing in January, and one of the carriage drivers who's been in the business for about 30 years got up and with his 2 minutes of testimony late in the afternoon said, they want to know why a tiny industry has so much power. It's because we haven't done anything wrong and we tell the truth. All right, so here's what I'm going to try to accomplish in my talk here. I want to kind of give a little overview of who's who in this fight, where we came from, who the organizations were involved, what happened over the past couple of years, you know, sort of what we can learn from all of this, and you know, some examples in the carriage business of things that have been going on in Montreal and Charleston versus what happened in Nashville, and then what's next in New York City. The animal activists aren't going away, and right now there is a exotic animal performing bill on the table in New York City. Just had a hearing about 2 weeks ago. So who's who here? The New York City carriage industry. This is us. We are 68 carriages, 68 small businesses out of 4 stables. We have been in business in Central Park, licensed by the city since the 1850s. So these are some of my colleagues here, their families. We have multi-generational families in the business, but we are a small industry. You know, the number that got thrown around a lot was 300, and that might be being generous. That includes the farriers, the people we buy hay from, the number of carriage drivers in the business, the stablemen. So we are the 300, but a tiny group. And, you know, we're small, middle-class folks, so we're up against the millions and millions of dollars from the animal rights industry. We have, I would say 95% of our business is immigrant. I'm, you know, one of a handful of people that was born in the States, but I'm not originally from New York, so I guess I'm a little bit of an immigrant too. I'm from Kentucky. So New York class, New Yorkers for Clean, Livable, and Safe Streets. They are, you know, the people that pushed this bill. They were founded in 2008 by Steve Nislek and Ed Sayers. You'll remember him. With a $250,000 donation from each of them. Nobody knew this at the time. We actually had to go and dig through Form 990s to find this out. They were founded as a 501c4 political lobbying group because their sole goal was to pass legislation to ban carriages in New York City. And the ASPCA is limited to how much lobbying they do, allegedly, to $1 million worth of lobbying expenses as a 501c3. Now, we know that they probably do a lot more than that, but they do have to report that on their Form 990s. So New York class, though, can lobby to their heart's content. They do have some limits on electioneering. They are a partner organization with some of the following, and there's more that I left off: the ASPCA, the HSUS, PETA, Friends of Animals, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Mercy for Animals, Last Chance for Animals, Catskill Animal Sanctuary, the Humane League, the League of Humane Voters, Animal Defenders International, ARIN, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is everybody. And at various points, New York class has stood with signs from PETA, with the HSUS, Dan Matthews. You know, of course, they were founded by the ASPCA. The ASPCA paid for their electric car, which set them back about $700,000. So back in 2010, New York class introduced a bill, Intro 86, which would have replaced horse-drawn carriages with, quote, reproduction vintage antique electric cars. There is our friend Ed and Steve Nislek, sitting there with their model that they had for many years. They didn't actually get this thing built until 2014, but it was built actually here in Florida, in Palm Beach. But they tried to kind of hide the ASPCA connection. The New York Times kind of snuck it in there. So that's from 2011, so that's 5 years ago. Wendy New, who is one of the biggest donors to PETA. She was married to a recycling and real estate magnate, and she replaced Ed Sayers on the board of New York class in 2012 when Ed Sayers left the ASPCA, left New York class for a variety of complicated reasons, some of which actually a fair amount of it had to do with us. Apparently Ed did not tell the board of the ASPCA that he had been giving this money to New York class. And I'll be mentioning her throughout discussing what's happened. Allie Feldman Taylor, she's got married. She's the executive director of New York class. So, Christine Quinn. I mentioned that bill, Intro 86A, to replace the carriages with reproduction vintage antique electric cars. That was introduced in 2010. It died in committee, even though it had 20-some-odd sponsors. And one of the big reasons why it died in committee is because of Christine Quinn. She was the Speaker of the City Council, and she ran for mayor in 2013 as the odds-on favorite to succeed Bloomberg. She's a horse person. Here she's actually giving an award to a mounted police horse that foiled the Times Square bomb. But I put that picture up there because she is a horsewoman, and that's one of the reasons why New York class couldn't convince her to get rid of the carriages, because she knew better. So New York class didn't get what they wanted. They couldn't get their bill passed with Christine Quinn as the speaker. So what did they do about that? They set up another independent expenditure group. They were already a 501c4, and called New York City's Not for Sale. And they were financed, 2/3 of it was financed by Steve Nislek and Wendy New. They started a campaign called Anybody But Quinn. They claimed that they were not going to endorse anybody for mayor. They just didn't care so long as it wasn't Christine Quinn. And basically they had protests at every event that she went to. It was organized by Allie Feldman. Wendy New spoke at several of their events. Literally, she got to the point where she could not release her public schedule because these folks would show up and they would scream at her. Now, they wouldn't scream at her about the carriages because they made it out to be about all kinds of other things, politics in New York, slush funds and everything. And that she was too close to Bloomberg, and that she'd gotten a third term for Bloomberg and all sorts of things. But these folks were actually, in fact, all the exact same people that I knew from 59th Street. Like this guy here has a sign that says anyone but Quinn for mayor. His name's Brian Gary. He's an animal rights activist. He likes to scream at small children holding dead pictures of dead horses. There's somebody there holding a Chris Quinn real estate or real corruption. They accused her of being too close to the real estate industry, but Steve Nislik and Wendy New are both involved in real estate in New York City. And all of their early literature from 2008 with New York Class focused on the fact that if we got rid of the horses, they take up a ton of square footage. We would just be parking cars, we could sell our buildings and enjoy a nice profit, and it would free up a lot of real estate for real estate development because the stables where the horses are kept on the west side have been rezoned for 70-story luxury high-rise condominium buildings. So there is a lot of real estate pressure around us, which gets relevant later. I'm going to actually give this guy 2 minutes to speak for himself here. New York Class spent almost $1.5 million making sure that Christine Quinn was not elected mayor, and the person who benefited from that was Bill de Blasio. He went from being a fourth place, also ran in early 2013, to being elected in a landslide victory, mayor of New York in 2013. He took office January 1st, 2014. Now, he had said from day one that he was going to ban the carriages in New York City. Day one. Oops. So where did it go? So I hope I have sound on this. But I should. This is from December 30th, 2013. Wait. It's thinking about it. Oh, am I just not hitting the, you know what? I know what it is. I don't know how to use this mouse pad.
Yes.
Sir, can you give us an update on your plan for fulfilling the campaign promise to phase out the horse carriage industry that's just around the corner?
I am so glad you asked that because I'm going to say it one more time, okay? I want to say to my brothers and sisters in the media, we're all in this together, and you're going to ask me every form of tough question. But I do ask you, and I say something for the 12th or 15th time, like, let's get it right. We are going to get rid of the horse carriages, period. The methodology for doing it. This is, again, we just hired a corporation counsel. He's going to help us work out the final touches on the legislative approach and the other pieces we need. We've always said we're going to work with the existing drivers to try and give them that other alternative, which is the electric vehicles that we think will be a cleaner, safer, wiser, more humane alternative that will be very appealing to tourists. There's some moving parts to work out, but we are going to quickly and aggressively move to make horse carriages no longer a part of the landscape in New York City. They're not humane. They're not appropriate to the year 2014. It's over. So just watch us do it now.
So, now you can imagine, though, he's 2 days away from being the mayor of New York, and we're a tiny little industry of 300 people, and we don't have lawyers, and we do have one thing, though. We have the Teamsters. And we joined Teamsters Local 553 in 2008. They actually asked us if we wanted to be Teamsters because we had not gotten a pay raise in 20 years, since 1989. And that's just ridiculous. And so we had to negotiate with management. Management in New York City for the carriages is the city council. They set our rates, so they asked us to join. And being Teamsters meant that we got a seat at the table. Now, we were still scared as anything in November and December of 2013. We had no idea what was going to happen in January. We didn't have much of a plan. But the Teamsters got together. That's us with Jimmy Hoffa this Labor Day. But George Miranda is the president of Joint Council 16. He's there with the mustache and the glasses. Talked to the International, and the International decided that this was an issue that they were going to fight for. And the Teamsters have never lost an issue they decided they were going to fight for. So they sent to us Bernadette Kelly. She's with the International. She's basically the Teamsters fixer, and she's amazing. But the first time I met her was standing in front of a New York class event that they were honoring Bill de Blasio at in December of 2013, giving him Horse Hero Award, and we just had flyers. And we were flyering people, hand-billing people. You know, that was the beginning of saying, no, we're going to fight this. And we have a plan, and we have people that are going to help us. Dimos Dimopoulos, he is the secretary-treasurer of our local. Steve Maloney's the carriage driver in the center there. He's my boss also. But he also works for the union. He's basically our shop steward. He's a second-generation carriage driver and one of the spokespeople for the industry. We had an excellent lobbyist, Heather Bowden, who's very important in connecting us with city council people. And they did eventually hire a PR person for Joint Council 16. His name's Alex Moore, and he's also been fabulous for us. So if I mention these people, that's why I'm mentioning them later. So what happened? The first thing the Teamsters did was they wanted to get an op-ed placed around Christmas with one of our, with basically the chaplain for the buildings trade union. His name's Father Jordan. If you go to the World Trade Center 9/11 Memorial, he's mentioned in there as holding services at Ground Zero back in the day. But he wanted to write an op-ed about the dignity of labor. And he wrote it right after they sent Bernadette up in early December, submitted it to the Daily News. The Daily News said, yeah, we'll run it. They didn't run it. They didn't run it. They didn't run it. We thought they'd forgotten about it and that nobody would care. And boom, it landed in the editorial section on January 1st. So the day that the mayor took office and he's trying to have the inauguration party, there's a headline, "Leave the carriage horses alone." And the media went berserk. Steve and I were doing multiple interviews a day, and we had no PR person at that time. It literally was just stand in front of whatever camera, we would just talk. You know, we had a bunch of anti-de Blasio people, you know, people from, you know, Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and stuff. They all supported us right away, all the local media. Then, like, the Quinnipiac poll. New York Class was telling the mayor, and they were telling the city council, and they were telling anybody to listen, that 75% of New Yorkers wanted us banned. And I called up Quinnipiac the day after the mayor took office, because New York Class had been repeating it, and I said, you guys do New York City polls, right? Have you ever considered looking at the carriage issue? And they said, we don't discuss our questions with anybody. Well, they probably would have asked anyway because it was a media circus, and it was the big campaign promise was to ban carriage horses. So it did come out about a week and a half later that, in fact, it was the other way around. Only about 25% of New Yorkers were in favor of a ban of carriage horses. In fact, 65% or so of New Yorkers were opposed to it. And that kind of changed everything when talking to city council people. Melissa Mark Viverito, she became the city council speaker. She was sort of de Blasio's right-hand gal. She was the first one to endorse him. She was also a big New York Class supporter. And New York Class's lobbyist actually got fined for helping get her elected city council speaker. It's telling me that we are not connected. But very importantly, very early on, she decided that because she had run against the Christine Quinn way of doing things, which is what Christine Quinn and Michael Bloomberg wanted to get done, got done. She said, no, I'm going to be more deliberative. I want to listen to the other council members. We're going to take time and educate people on this issue. And then if the council's interested in passing a bill, you know how I feel about it. I support a ban, but, you know, that's up to the rest of us. And then Randy, also at this time in the winter of 2014, organized the first Canines and Coaches. We partnered with well, we didn't really partner with Westminster. We just happened to be next to Westminster's showdown at the piers, but the stable's a half a block away, and we offered free stable tours to anybody who wanted to come over. They could bring their dogs if they wanted, and discounted carriage rides to people who took the dogs. And we had a Spinoni Italiano who did take a carriage ride, won his breed, and then down at the Garden, it was mentioned as one of the highlights of his trip to New York. So again, this is all the kinds of ways you can get good PR out there, and little places to have, the announcers at Westminster be like, oh, and he took a carriage ride, and it was fantastic. Everybody knows this guy, Liam Neeson. He came to the stable in March of 2014. He invited the mayor and city council members. About a third of the council either showed up or sent their staff members. The mayor did not show up. Liam told him to man up and come. The mayor has still not come to the stables after all of this discussion of carriage horses. He said he would before he did anything. He never has. So we continued in the spring. I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. We continued to build support. We had veterinarians out to the stable. We got Central Labor Council endorsing us. We went to every single city council stated meeting and literally stood in the lobby to talk to council people. And even though they weren't discussing the carriage ban, because they wouldn't tell us when they were going to introduce it, they kept saying, it's being drafted, it could happen any time, it's a priority for the mayor. They weren't going to tell us when they were going to introduce it. So just in case we were there, and just to let them know that we're watching, we did have an incident with a carriage horse named Spartacus who tripped and fell, and it actually turned out to be good for us. We invited everybody over to the stable to check him out, and they got to see that stable on 38th Street as well. And then Liam Neeson narrated a mini documentary about our industry, Save NYC Horse Carriages, that provide a lot of information to people about our business. And then the Daily News happened. They kind of let us know that they liked us. New York Class unveiled their electric car, which I refer to as the Franken-Tank, because the New York Times referred to it as the unholy spawn of a pedicab and Thomas the Tank Engine. But it was a flop. The New York Class had given the Daily News exclusive advanced pictures of the car, and the Daily News didn't run a story on it. In fact, they ran an editorial on it on the day that it was unveiled about how ugly and hideous it was, and it was no substitute for a horse, and that they would be launching a Save Our Horses campaign. That was their editorial position, and they were going to run with it. And this is kind of old school community journalism. The Daily News styles itself as New York's hometown paper. They've done this with gun control, they've done this with Donald Trump, they've done this with all kinds of things, but they pick issues and they run with it, and they ran with this one. They did profiles of drivers, they did profiles of horses. They fact-checked New York Class when New York Class said that carriage horses were banned in Paris, London, Toronto, and Beijing. That's not true. And they had all kinds of anti-New York Class and anti-Franken-Tank editorials. It was an absolute onslaught. But my favorite article that came out of all of these, and there were a ton of them, was the one about how if they ban the carriage horses, mushroom sales will be in danger because we grow mushrooms. Well, we don't grow the mushrooms, but Giorgio Mushrooms grows mushrooms on carriage horse manure and muck. So the animal rights people hated that. That was their least favorite article, actually. So again, the summer continued on. Again, more of this. We got the Working Families Party endorsement, the Progressive Caucus of the City Council. They were trying to figure out how to write this bill because guess what? It's not very constitutional to the New York Class just wanted to make us drive those electric cars, which didn't exist partly. There was one of them. And they wanted to take our horses and put them in sanctuaries, all of which posed constitutional problems that the corporate council was trying to figure out and argue with the animal rights people to come up with some sort of bill that would be remotely constitutional. They wanted to introduce this bill in August. They have like one stated council meeting in August. It's also a time when a lot of carriage drivers go on vacation to Ireland and other places. So our lobbyist, who was not talking to the mayor's office, the mayor's office refused to talk to us. They refused to answer emails. Basically begged the city council, don't introduce us while our guys are on vacation, so they didn't. And then became the question of Where do you put such a bill? It should have gone to the Committee on Consumer Affairs because they would take away our licenses and give us different licenses for electric cars. That committee was chaired by a guy named Rafael Espinal, who's a young councilman. He basically came out and said, under no circumstances will I support a carriage ban. So you can put it in my committee, but you know, you're not going to get a hearing, and the rest of my council, my committee members feel the same way. So that pushed the bill back. We also participated in a fashion show, this was all happening like September, Fashion Week, and the animal rights people went absolutely ballistic because we were stepping on their PETA toes. Yeah, Randy helped with that when she was there, but you know, we were stepping on PETA's toes, you know, in the fashion world, and they didn't like it. You know, even though we were just operating our carriages exactly where we operate them every single day, the fact that we had models in them, you know, made it that much worse. But we did get some great articles out of that because there were articles, like there's a great article in Vice about that. They basically focused on how crazy they were. And we also met Rain Dove, who is a model, an androgynous model. And she had been so bullied by them that even though I think probably she would have been inclined to side with the animal rights people, she was just appalled by it, and she actually came to the stables. You know, she looked around, she saw for herself, she pulled a carriage herself, and now she's one of our biggest fans, and she has like this giant Instagram following, and she's getting big in modeling. So that was, you know, please, animal rights people, piss off people to the point that they come over to our side. That's great. And then there was an Equus Film Festival that got started then, and we participated in that, which last year, this is going to be the third year this year. 2 years ago was the first one. The Liam Neeson Save NYC Carriages thing was in it. There was a panel on horse carriages. They got protested by the animal rights people. Last year, it was bigger. The film festival was sponsored in part by the HSUS, which pissed off some of the horse community in New York City. So this year, the prime sponsor of the third annual Equus Film Festival is Protect the Harvest. So... So November of 2014, so just after I did this, Sunday night after Thanksgiving, which is one of our busiest weekends of the year, our lobbyist finally gets a call from the mayor's office. And he says, we're introducing the bill this week. I can't talk. I got to go call the other stakeholders. Who are the other stakeholders? The animal rights people. They were getting more attention from the mayor's office than we will. I'm not going to play all of this video, but I just wanted to show you. This was filmed by Sandy Bacon the next day to get a reaction from carriage drivers about the idea that this bill was finally coming. I did it wrong again. I'm a carriage driver.
I would say to the mayor that I have a job, driving a green, handsome cab, and I will do so for the next 50 years. I'm outraged that he wants to make me a taxi driver in the middle of the night. He doesn't have the decency to come out and put it out in front where everybody else would do it. That's what I'm outraged about. That 300 men and women have to wake up and put their kids on the bus to find out that their mayor wants to do away with his business overnight. Shady. Very shady. Didn't even tell the council. This is all his own personal agenda.
And he didn't tell the council. Like, the council read it in the newspaper the next morning, and they were not happy to find out that all of a sudden they were being expected to deal with this issue that they really had hoped that they wouldn't, and they told the city council speaker they didn't want to do that. So the bill was introduced December 8th. The bill would have banned carriages effective June 1st, 2016, and given carriage owners these green taxis. They're not yellow cabs, they're green cabs. They can do Uber, they can work in the outer boroughs, but they can't work the central business district in Midtown Manhattan. Yellow cabs, they used to be worth $1 million, they're probably worth about $700,000, $800,000 now. These guys, they can't give them away. And they were going to skip us over the waiting period for the livery license and everything like that. So we got together with the green cab people, and they opposed it because that's not fair to them to give us all green cabs. That was their solution to the whole license problem. But Danny Glover visited the stables. We did more of the same, just media, tours. Anybody who wanted a stable, they could come in. Steve Nislek and Wendy New, though, met with de Blasio at the end of February. They each donated $50,000 to the Campaign for One New York, which is the mayor's slush fund, which is under investigation for the FBI now, 3 days later. And later that month, and this is where we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, I don't want to belabor it too much, there's supposed to be an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment study that is done with every bill, and it usually takes about 6 months. The mayor's office had not issued a request for proposals for this environmental impact study until after he got that $100,000 from Steve Nislik and Wendy New. And then they gave it to a firm that has connections with their real estate companies. Bill continued to be laid over in committee. Like I said, there was this conflict of interest with the environmental impact study. Meanwhile, we published the results of a cortisol study that we had done. We didn't do it. Western University did it, but we paid for half of it, done by Dr. Joe Bertone, who showed that the carriage horses are, in fact, not stressed. The headline in the Daily News is, "You're probably more stressed than a New York City carriage horse." And it found that the horses are more stressed on vacation, which is mandated by the city as part of their benefits package, that they have to go on vacation. They're more stressed on the farm than they are in the city, and they're the least stressed in the city when they're actually at work on 59th Street. They measure them 4 times during the day. It's great, great study. And then I followed the mayor down to Washington, D.C. at his progressive agenda, and he was having a big press conference on Capitol Hill, so I got on the train, went down to visit the Teamsters, which are right next to Capitol Hill, rounded up a couple of Teamsters, went over there with flyers to handle. I wasn't going to interrupt. I'm more polite than the other side. I don't interrupt their events. But just to be there and challenge the idea that he's some sort of progressive, because progressives don't get rid of union jobs. They don't ignore science. They don't, harm working families and immigrant families. And then in the spring, there was a push that New York Class had tried. If you're going to get stuff done, a lot of times it isn't popular. You do it during the budget season, which is April and May. And that's when the mayor says, if you give me a vote on the carriage horse issue, I'll give you your playground, or I'll give you your money for your hospital in your district. And that didn't happen. He never got the votes. New York Class sent out a $500,000 mailer campaign that was not about the horses, but rather about things that we have said to animal rights activists over the years that are not politically correct. And it really turned off a lot of the council members. They lost like 5 votes over that. People that had said they were either going to vote for a ban or that were undecided, they all said, I'm not voting for this. These people are crazy. So the bill just withered and died. It didn't, get its hearing. They kept scheduling hearings that never happened because there was no support for it. All of a sudden, the mayor's office calls the Teamsters. They had never called us in the entire process except to tell us they were introducing a bill. And they said, let's talk. How about building a stable in the park? We said, sure, we can talk about it. It was like the most secretive thing ever, like literally in the basement of City Hall, you go to a sub-basement that has no windows, and that's where we had to talk about it. But they said, we want this done. This was like at the end of June when the whole bill collapsed. We want this done in July. We want this done and dusted. We want an agreement. I want to be on the steps of City Hall saying we're going to put the horses in the park and build stables because de Blasio had always argued that this was a traffic issue somehow. At the same time, construction permits were granted for the buildings next to 2 of the stables, and demolition started. But the animal rights activists didn't know about these negotiations about stables, and they were like, where's our ban bill? What happened? He told them on the radio, you can go get the votes from the city council. It's not my problem. I don't do bans, even though he always said he was going to be the one to ban the carriages. But he's right. It's the city council that bans us. So when it eventually came out that Teamsters had been talking to the city about putting stables in the park, there were a lot of people who were upset. They're like, you don't negotiate with terrorists, you don't compromise with animal rights people, you've done nothing wrong, what are you doing there? The Teamsters, though, are in the business of negotiating contracts, so it's something they're very good at. The problem was that the mayor's office said either you can come talk to us about stables in the park, or we will introduce a bill that will, I'm calling this the New York class nuclear option. We will introduce a bill to further regulate your industry. You want to stop work at 90 degrees? Let's make it 86. You want to work for 9 hours a day? 6 hours a day. 5-week vacations? Make it 10 weeks. And this will just be better for the horses. Everybody will be able to see this. I can get this bill passed. It would have put us out of business. So we kind of had to talk to them. We had a meeting in December amongst the industry. We actually had 3 options A, B, and C to discuss. A was status quo. We do not talk to them. We do not negotiate with terrorists. We want the status quo. We want nothing to change. Option B is let the mayor do what he wants. Let him try to pass that bill that New York class wants to regulate us out of business. Or option C, see if we can get a stable in the park. There's real estate problems. There's real estate pressures. And option C also said if we can't get a stable in the park that meets our things, we will then, our fallback position is option A, which is the status quo. And that's what we agreed to. That's what the Teamsters were negotiating with City Hall on that basis. There was a lot of pressure from the mayor to get this done quickly. We were like, no, we can't get this done quickly. We have to go to our members. It's very complicated. And the mayor finally just kind of issued a press release that said we had an agreement in concept, which nobody even knows what that means. That we had basically an agreement in concept was we agreed to the concept of stables in the park, but we had none of the details worked out about how many horses there are going to be, how many carriages there are going to be, if there were fewer carriages, would people get paid, where the stable would be. That none of that had been worked out. But the mayor went ahead and set a hearing in the Transportation Committee on an amended Intro 573, which is very interesting because he went from banning the carriages to now we're going to spend $25 million in building the stable in the park because they're such animal abusers. So this bill would not ban horse-drawn carriages, but would limit carriages to working inside the park. A stable would be built inside the park to house the horses. Starting June 1st of this year, the carriages would not be able to work outside the park. And starting in December of this year, carriages would be limited to 1 shift per day. Right now, most of them work 2 or have 2 horses, and total licenses for horses would be limited to 110. We had never limited horse licenses. If I wanted to have 5 horses for my 1 carriage, if I could afford to pay for them all and keep them on vacation, I was welcome to do it and rotate them a whole bunch, and they'd hardly ever work. But they wanted to limit the number of horses because they wanted to cut this business in half, and they wanted to put us out of business. And then when a stable was open at some date in the future, the total licensed horses would be limited to 95, because at the time there were 190 licensed horses, so they wanted to tell the animal rights people, look, we rescued half of them from the cruel carriage industry. The rest, we spent $25 million building them a stable in the park. But basically it would have regulated as a business because there was no guarantee they would ever build this park. They hadn't even told the Parks Department. So what happened, they went to a hearing in the Transportation Committee, which was chaired by a New York class supporter who had introduced the bill. So he gave it a hearing. The stable deal was still being negotiated by the Teamsters. And when you're in negotiations, you do not talk to anybody. You don't talk to the press, you don't leak. That's how you're supposed to do a negotiation in good faith. The mayor's office was leaking all over the place, to the media, to New York class, to everybody. They were not negotiating in good faith. And we had a problem, of course, with the number of horse licenses and the implementation date. We would have been out of business before they ever built a stable. And I'm using city council members' quotes here that the city did a piss-poor job defending their bill. They were, quote, trying to sell us a paper bag with a hole in it. That's us testifying, because we were like at the shotgun wedding. Again, I'm not going to play all of this, but towards the end here. Yeah. I think that's it.
First to come to the altar, and as a result of that, you
and everything is as you want it.
I want to get David Greenfield's
what we
thing.
call a classic shotgun wedding. That's what it is. You and your industry is at the barrel of a shotgun, and you are forced to come to the altar, and as a result of that, you are in fact getting married to other folks from different perspectives, and as tends to be the case in a shotgun wedding, no particular party is particularly comfortable or happy, and certainly under the chapel you're not going to speak about your reservations as you have a shotgun pointed in your back. The bill is written today. As it is written today and is presented to us, would you be happy with this bill, yes or no? No. Thank you. That's progress. Good. So at least we know here, on our side of the City Hall, that those of you here who represent the industry have some serious concerns about this, and we need to address these concerns.
Are you stating today unequivocally that this compromise, the way it's been sold in the media, is in fact the final piece of legislation on this industry? Is this it? When we say this is a compromise, are we done? We're not going to hear about this for the next 6 years. So it's a yes or no.
I'm sorry, I don't think that that's a yes or no question. I think that where this is part of a legislative process that you are deeply involved in, and the legislative process is designed to hear from all stakeholders and all parties.
But this was sold as a compromise, so you're not necessarily agreeing not to come back to us, is what you're saying. Because that's the deal, the inherence of a deal. When you have a compromise is you have a deal. So you're saying the deal may or may not be binding in the future.
I can't answer that question, I'm sorry.
I think that non-answer answered it. Thank you.
So the gist of that, of course, is that they had no answers. The only answer they had a concrete answer on from the city was that, in fact, since 2009, there's been 15 incidents of the horses going to and from the stables in traffic. 10 involved other vehicles, and there were 4 minor injuries to horses and no human injuries. And the city council said, well, then why are we here? Because that doesn't sound like a reason to do this. And then they, to spend $25 million on a stable, just so that we can avoid those tiny, rare instances where something might happen. And as you saw in that last little bit, they made it clear that they weren't going to be done with this, that it was just a step, you know. And so the city council said, well then, but the negotiations continue. This is Steve. This is where we got to it, because the city was still like, the mayor's like, we're going to pass this bill. I'm going to twist arms. I'm going to get it passed. You guys agreed. We had a deal. You guys agreed to a stable in the park. And we said, we can't sign this bill. We're going to go out of business. And at a certain point, the Teamsters even had the Speaker of the City Council, Melissa Viverito, who is an animal rights supporter, who wants us banned, going to the mayor's office and saying it would only be reasonable to let them continue the business until you actually build this stable. Then you can cut it in half. Then you can change the regulations, whatever. But until you build this stable in the park, don't do that to them. And 3 times the mayor said, no, that's the deal. I want it cut in half December 1st. Bear in mind, they're demolishing buildings around our stable. So that's kind of where we're at. But the Teamsters stayed at the table, because that's what they do. Until the 11th hour, there was supposed to be a hearing and a vote on this on February 5th, which was a Friday. On February 4th, the Teamsters said, that's it, we can't work with crazy people. There is no deal, we withdraw support. And within half an hour, the city council said, well, if the Teamsters don't support it, the industry doesn't support it, we don't care what the mayor thinks, we're not supporting it either. And this is one of my favorite headlines of all of them, which is mocked, resented, and now dead. De Blasio's horse debacle makes history. So that's from Politico. So, and they literally had to go give a State of the Union, a State of the City address that night, and then they renewed our licenses in March of 2016 for another 2 years, because that was what they're going to do, is they're just stop renewing our licenses. And when they finally came in the mail, there was a delay. They finally came in the mail. That was a big deal for us. And then by April, this is at the Inner Circle, which is a comedy thing, kind of like the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
State and city.
So Hillary's talking about the, she tried to swipe the thing.
These MetroCard slots in the subway. It took me like 5 swipes. The little terminal thing kept saying, please swipe again. I mean, you've got to fix that. You don't have to worry about horses anymore. Fix the turnstiles at the MetroCard.
I will get right on it. Right on it.
So the point is that by this point, now the Democratic establishment in New York City is laughing about it. Bill, you don't have to worry. about the horses anymore. And there's rumors that actually the Clintons refer to de Blasio as that horse and carriage mayor. It has defined his mayoralty. All of this is being under investigation by the U.S. Attorney right now in terms of some of the money that's going back and forth between New York class and the mayor. So I know I'm running a little short on time, but I want to kind of talk about some of the things that we did that I thought worked and were some of the most important things to have this happen for a bunch of people who, the Teamsters have resources, but they do not have the resources that the animal rights people do. The first thing that I think is the most important thing is that we had to humanize and prioritize the people first. There's a tendency to want to be like, are the horses happy? How do the horses live? What about the horses, the horses, the horses? And when the animal rights people are saying we're all animal abusers and that they've spent years dehumanizing us, none of that matters if you can't convince people that that the carriage drivers are the ones that really need to be considered. So, I mean, this is from a really great article that was done in New York Mag where they did 5 profiles of 9 carriage drivers. But, you know, the Daily News did a lot of these. We did a lot of them on social media. The Teamsters did a lot of them just to highlight the people in our business and what it means to them, you know, that was the first priority. And when we were talking with the city council members, you know, they care about jobs. They care about working families. So that was the first important thing. Transparency, transparency, transparency. Anyone who wanted to come see our stables at any time of day got to see them. And especially if they were a council member and if they wanted to see any of the stables. As a matter of fact, I was at work one day and a council member did walk up to the stable on 38th Street. And of course I showed him around. Because that's what you have to do. And, you know, do it both literally in person and online. We put up a lot of pictures and things. It doesn't preclude, though, being prepared, you know, that you do have to figure out what your message is. And when they hired Alex as our PR guy, you know, he was very much like, what do we want to accomplish here with everything that we do? What are we moving the ball forward on? And a lot of times it's the workers, diversity, immigrants, progressive values, because we are talking about New York City here. You know, that's the things we wanted to push. Issues like property rights. It's New York City. You know, it's not such a political expedient way to talk about things. Also, do the science and use your experts. This is kind of a blurry photo, but that's Joe Bertoni. He actually presented his research on the cortisol study to the city council and some of their staffers, the ones that came. We also put that up online for people to see. Also, we had other science. Charles Kamenoff, who does the Streets blog thing, is a traffic expert. He actually used New York class's numbers on the number of accidents that we had that they had gotten from the NYPD, and actually found out that we have fewer collisions per mile than yellow cabs, and yellow cabs are the safest motor vehicles in Midtown Manhattan in terms of miles traveled in between collisions. So we had those at the ready. Statistics, you know, those all help. We also invited all the vets in. We scheduled vet tours, had people write up ads, you know, so pretty much overwhelmed them on the force of the scientific evidence there. Be a part of your community. So this is one of my favorite things that Bernadette thought of. She insisted that the stables decorate for Christmas. Right after the bill was introduced, because how can you get rid of the people that decorate the streets? And we're in these industrial areas, so the idea of having, you know, the carriages dressed up, and they sort of like, she did decorations in the style of the stables, like the big stable on 52nd Street in a slightly nicer, more residential neighborhood, so it's got the fancy designer decorations, and then the one that's in the more industrial areas got the Christmas lights that, you know, anybody would hang up. So, and literally that picture of the guy taking the picture of a dog, we had like those lights up for like an hour, and people from the neighborhood were taking pictures with it. So, doing parades. This is the St. Pat's for All parade. Sure. Okay. All right. So, yeah, no need to evacuate. So we did this a couple of years. Steve, you know, he grew up in Sunnyside. St. Pat's for All was the alternative St. Patrick's Day parade that did not exclude gay and lesbian groups and invited everybody, including carriage horses. We were welcome there too. So we did that a couple of years, and we met a lot of council people there as well as a lot of kids. This is the Mermaid Parade. My friend Jill, she always did it. She's from Coney Island, so she did a Stop the Ban, Save the New York City horse-drawn the New York City seahorse-drawn carriages. So SOS, save our seahorses, and I'm dressed up like the seahorse with blinders. Blessing of the Animals, we've done a bunch of those. I actually did that in 2013. Cindy Adams has Blessing of the Animals at the holiday, not at Feast of St. Francis, at an Episcopal church, and she invites the mounted unit there and all the canines, and it's sponsored by Best Friends and everything like that. And so we had the audacity to show up. Most people loved it. There were the little whiny ones who were like, what are they doing there? They're animal abusers. And somebody's like, well, shouldn't at least the horse get blessed then? But it's an opportunity to stand next to the police horses. What's the difference between police horses and carriage horses? There isn't any. But also just to kind of challenge people's notion, it's hard to be rude to somebody in front of a church when you're trying to get your horse blessed at the holidays. Plus, we always took horses that love dogs, and dogs love horses, so we got some cute photo ops. There's Gareth there handing out handbills in council members' districts about the issue. We would go into subway stations and hand them to people that clearly live there. And that way it spread the message. They read it on the subway. If they wanted to, they could call their council member, and so it got the community involved in the issue. We have a lot of annual events. We've mentioned Canines and Coaches. Miss P did take a carriage ride one year. She won. The Equus Film Festival, Clip Clop NYC, which is one of our open houses that we've done. Didn't do it this year because we were very busy and exhausted, but the Blessing of the Animals. And then Humane Education. We can call it that when I have a classroom of 4th graders or middle schoolers in the stable and give them a tour and talk about comparative anatomy and how horses think and what they're like and what the bridle is. That's humane education too. And I think that's something that we should continue to do more of and to reclaim that title, because it belongs to the animal rights people, and they are teaching people that horses are unhappy and the metal bar in their mouth is torture. So a little bit about politics. And get to know your legislators. There's 51 city council members in New York City, and at least I can pretty much name them all now. I may not know all of them by sight, but how do you do that? Lobbying is not a dirty word. Lobbyist. Citizens can lobby. Literally, you stand in the lobby and you wait for somebody to come out and you talk to them. Or in this case, you're at a parade and you see the city council member. That's Jimmy Van Bramer. He's one of the people that really helped stop this bill because he's the majority leader. And he, it turns out, had told the mayor when he tried to get the ban bill passed, I will not pass a ban bill at all if you come to me with a compromise. If the Teamsters are on board, then I'm on board. And that's why we were at the table so long, as the mayor had pretty much told Jimmy Van Bramer, the Teamsters are on board. We weren't on board yet. But that's how they thought that they had the votes. Put the fun back in political fundraisers. We went to a lot of these. People think you have to sit down at $1,000 plate things. City council members, $25 check means a lot to them. It means you're on their team. And, get your friends together and go to these things. There's usually beer and food, and you get to meet all kinds of interesting people. And when you've got an issue like ours, people like to talk to us when you tell them what you do. And politicians are people too. This is Costa Constantinides in the wool coat there, shaking Connor McHugh's hand after the bill collapsed. They actually hugged first. It was more like Hollywood run across the thing at City Hall, because he is a friend. These guys, they really, I came away from all this with so much respect for a lot of these people. Not all of them, but a lot of them that actually, they're trying the best that they can. They're very busy, and all they hear from are the other side. And so many of them said, it's so nice to actually hear from normal people. No, you know, and that, but you know, you know, we tend to get frustrated with them, but they're public servants. They're trying to serve their communities and do the best that they can. And the stuff that they asked and the stuff that they did in that hearing to, you know, challenge the city on that was really impressive, I thought. So even people who supported the bill were asking them tough questions because they couldn't believe that the city just thought that, or the mayor just thought that he could pass this bill because he and some wealthy real estate developers wanted it. And then it's not all about you and your issue. So if you're going to go to fundraiser and if you're going to talk to council members, I mean, most of us are kind of single issue people. These are like what we obsessed with, and the other side is obsessed with things. But, you know, we went to a lot of events that had nothing to do with carriages. And, geez, live tweeting sure gets the council people's attention when you say nice things about them. You know, we went to the Pride event at the City Council or the Manhattan Democrats Demi Awards and, you know, congratulating people on that. Or, you know, whatever your issue is in your neighborhood that has nothing to do with animal issues, you know, that's helpful too. And know how the system works. We got, I mean, all the rules and regulations about when hearings are called, how you vote, who's on the committee, when they meet, you know, and then FOIL requests and other open records. That's how we found out, like, the mayor was meeting with, you know, the animal rights people. They kind of refused to answer a lot of our FOIL requests. We're actually having to sue them over some of them. But there are certain agencies that will actually answer those things. Build alliances, recruit supporters. So most of us are very small. So in order to have a big voice, we have to stick together. I mean, I rattled off New York Class's list of allies. And they got the HSUSP to the ASPCA, Friends of Animals. They're all working on this issue together. And they already have way more money than we ever will have. So we have to stick together. Supporters don't have to be other animal people. For instance, we had a broad labor coalition. We had neighborhood groups. We made friends with the taxi people, the parks people, the street safety people. You know, we even had on an issue, a hearing completely unrelated to us on Vision Zero, so traffic safety. When that electric car came out, there was an association for the blind that was testifying against this bill because they didn't want silent electric cars in their parks. So you can think broadly about the people who might be affected by some legislation and get their help too. And also being willing to accept help if it serves your overall message, even if it's not perfect. People don't have to agree with you on everything to be helpful. That's how you build coalitions. And then to mobilize your people, you know, you got to contact city council people. Talking on Facebook doesn't do everything, so you remind people to write letters to the editor and find out who's local and include them in any on-the-ground events. So we actually created a couple of different Facebook groups and figured out who was local and who could meet, and here we are at a restaurant discussing strategy, and one of the guys who made all these signs that he distributes all over town, he brought them. And then be real. We're actually generally more likable than a lot of the opposition once you get to know us. So some people think, well, you got to go and hit them back harder at what they do, or do what they do, or send out robocalls, or do this. But those strategies actually aren't very effective. They're just annoying. Council people hate that. They hate, you know, having a dead horse outside their office. They think it's silly, and it's not going to change their mind. And I think it's a little immature. And real people are also reasonable and are willing to have discussions and to, quote, negotiate, which doesn't necessarily mean compromise. It means talking about what happens, what we could do, different things. And what happened in our case was that the animal rights people were willing to compromise. Actually, they were the ones that were compromising, and you say, well, how can it be abuse if you're now going to build them a $25 million stable? So they kind of negotiated themselves out of their position in the first place and then looked really silly afterwards. Whereas nothing changed for us in the end. What not to do. This is what an animal rights activist in a horse costume in front of Liam Neeson's apartment. You know, going to people's houses just doesn't make them happy. So social media is not a strategy. What I mean is it's a tactic, it's a tool, but sometimes people say if you're going to do this, you have to do Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Yes, you have to do all of that, but the question is, to what end? What are you trying to get to that? So you have to figure out how you're going to leverage all that social media for those things that I talked about. Facebook's a great organizing tool to get people together. I know so many people in here from being on Facebook, but you have to you have to direct people places. Are we going to get in a closed group and discuss what we're going to do in person and how we're going to call people? Are we going to write letters to the editor? Or are we going to educate people on public pages? But we can't just comment on just stuff on Facebook and expect anything to get done. Things in politics and in the media still get done face-to-face, on the phone, or in person. So Facebook could also be informative. We started a bunch of Facebook things. We didn't, actually. People who supported us did. We have fans who are not carriage people who said, save NYC carriage horses from radical animal rights activists. We had the hate speech of New York City animal rights activists where we documented all the bad things they'd said about us. And Public Voices for New York City Carriages where we documented all the letters to the editor from people that we didn't even know in support of us. Twitter, choose your hashtags carefully. We eventually settled on Carriage On because they couldn't change that one. We had started off with Save NYC Horse Carriages, which is very long. And at a certain point, we decided we actually didn't need saving anymore. So what's our hashtag going to be if we're going to educate people? It's a great way to connect with the media and reporters firsthand. The electeds that are tweeting, they're actually tweeting. It's not a staffer. It's a great way to actually, if you call their office, you're not going to talk to them, but if you send them a tweet, they'll see it. But you have to be careful because it's easily overdone, so you don't want to annoy anybody. You don't want to turn them to the other side. And we found so many people on Twitter that we then found them on Facebook and then contacted them and then added them into groups and then mobilized them that way. Pictures of, we have an Instagram feed. This is my Instagram feed. But to show the everyday life for horses and humans, which is advancing those goals we talked about earlier about being transparent. This is what we're doing right now. We're fixing a carriage, or sitting in the back of the carriage waiting for a ride or whatever, and it humanizes us too. YouTube, Sandy Bacon was great on this. She's a former advertising producer, and sometimes just documenting things like when it comes to the media, she would record the entire interview and then all the stupid stuff that they cut out because the animal rights people weren't coherent, she'd post, after they'd edited it to make it, the news had edited it to make it simple. So for instance, we had an instance where a horse had pulled his bridle off, he'd run the loop of the carriage ride, he'd gotten back, Allie Feldman shows up and she's like, "See, this is why we need to ban horses. It's dangerous. They can spook. It's just a public safety issue." And the reporter said, "Allie, the NYPD responded on horseback. The mounting unit came and checked this out. So are you saying we should ban the horses?" And she's like, "Are we talking about police horses? No, we're not talking about police horses. You said they shouldn't be in the streets and the horses spook." And she said, well. When have you ever heard of a police horse having an accident? No, you haven't. Sandy put that up online. She's Twitter friends with Lou Leone, as the station manager of the local Fox channel, and he thought it was hilarious because he then posted a link to where one of the Fox anchors had actually DUI and had run into a police horse several years ago and lost his job. But that comes to humor, that at a certain point, this is all very serious. The animal rights issue is serious. It's a threat to animals, it's a threat to our jobs, it's a threat to our property. We lose sleep over this, it's stressful, but they are ludicrous. And there have been times that we've finally gotten to where we can laugh about it. And when you've gotten to that point, I think it's a good thing. Another incident where the horse got loose from the stable. He went trotting up 11th Avenue. The police cars had to come and chase him and herd him into the things so he could be caught because he broke his halter, so he was naked. And New York Class tried to make a big deal out of that. The horse was fine, but it made the New York 1 traffic thing when somebody said, so the anchor asked the traffic girl, "Are there any horses on the little logos where you have the accidents and the construction of horse?" And so when people start to laugh about it, then it's helpful. YouTube can also be used to build lines, and Sandy did all kinds of things. We congratulated American Pharaoh, and then we tweeted it at his people, and then they retweeted it, and everything like that. I was running out of time, so I'm not going to get into too much of that, where YouTube working in concert with media outlets as a documentary source. Sandy got her press pass because she was documenting things that the animal rights people were doing, like when they were chasing us around in undercover cars, trying, stalking us, and therefore breaking the law in Central Park by being motorized vehicles in the park. We wrote a story about that, got a story about how they were stalking us. They, of course, had to edit all their undercover footage. It took them 6 months, and when it finally came out, I was like, didn't you deny having anything to do with that 6 months ago? And why did it take you 6 months? So social media is not a strategy, it's a tactic, but know that people are paying attention to what you're saying on social media. We had all kinds of reports that City Hall was monitoring all of our feeds. It's not traditional media either. It is sometimes better to write an op-ed and get it published than or a letter to the editor than a Facebook post, but Facebook posts do make great letters to the editor. So we were telling people, that's a great comment, send it to the Daily News as a letter to the editor. But blogs can be almost as good as traditional media, though. We had John Katz write a number of long blogs. And how did we end up with him writing long blogs that he ended up having an ebook practically about it? Was he had said that he had been to Central Park to see the horses that were disappearing because the mayor was going to ban us. And I went on Facebook and I said, hey, do you want to see the stable? And he came and he saw and he's written a lot about it. So I'm trying to be really fast here. So now the question is, we won in New York City. How do we extend that? The animal rights people do the other thing. They win one little thing and then they spread it other places. We can do the same thing back. The mayor of Montreal, Dennis Coderre, decided this summer that he was going to put a moratorium on the carriage industries there, suspend their licenses because there had been an accident or something like that, and he just thought it wasn't safe. And Montreal pretty much ran our campaign in 2 weeks because that was the timeline they were on. Like, they got in front of the media, they told their stories as people that had bought businesses, that were working in the business, and loved horses. They got public opinion on their side. They were, they did everything that we did, they did in 2 weeks. And we sent up a thing, which is what this paragraph's from, basically as an amicus statement, if you will, to the lawyers, because theirs was a legal issue more than a legislative issue for the courts to decide, but basically saying this issue of carriages being safe on the streets, being good for horses, has been settled in New York. So, and then cited a lot of the studies and things that have been done and the vet stuff. So it's like, you don't have to do this in Montreal, we've done it in New York. We've answered that question. And the court laughed the mayor of Montreal out of court. That what they were doing was ridiculous. Charleston, they had a horse that stepped on his foot and pulled a shoe and stepped on the toe clamp and was bleeding all over Market Street. And animal rights people were there because they always are with their phones, and they were filming and they made a big deal out of it. And I just wanted to post this here because Charleston did a really great job of being transparent. They posted every vet visit, every farrier visit, explained to people what was going on with that horse, and I just thought it was a really great example of transparency. As Classic Carriage Works, Palmetto Carriage Works down there also actually has a webcam in their carriage stable. You can go on and see people sweeping the aisle or hooking up horses, and so those are things that I think have been really useful. Cautionary tale, Asheville banned carriages though in April. Asheville, North Carolina. What happened there was the woman there thought that she was better than New York. She did not want to be compared to New York. She rescued her horses. They lived in pastures, and they trucked in and everything, and she did massage and other things, and City Council banned her unanimously. She didn't ask for any help. We know people in North Carolina who could have gone to testify for her. She was there. She didn't talk to the council people before the hearing. She thought she could show up at a hearing, present her case, and that the council would listen to her, even though, of course, they had been, the whole reason they introduced legislation in the first place is they'd been meeting with all the animal rights people already. And so they banned her. And I'm so sorry. I know. I just wanted to finish up with one thing with the circus and then we'll be done. So the question is now the circus in New York. The council introduced 1233 over the summer to ban exotic and wild performing animals in New York City. This is an anti-circus bill. It got a hearing on the Committee on Health on October 20th, and I think the circus can win in New York City. By learning from what we did already, they're focusing on jobs. They've got the unions out there. They've got Unions Alliance. They're talking about the people. They brought in Alexander Lacey. They've brought the science in, and they've got positive op-eds, blogs, social media, letters to the editor, and including thanks to Naya, Sarah put out the legislative statement that also encouraged people to write them, and I think that will continue to be helpful. So, got 2 minutes? A minute, sorry. Okay, well then you don't get to hear my testimony from City Council. All right, you guys can find it online. So that's it.